Hello and welcome to the Bucketlist podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford, along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Bucketlister podcast. Today we are back chatting again with the legend that is Dave Blower, and for those who listened to Dave's last episode, he is one of our guides who's done many of our trips, and I asked him on today because I wanted to discuss Machu Picchu. Now, for those people that have got Machu Picchu on their bucket list, most people get to Machu Picchu by trekking the Inca Trail. But we actually, as a company, at the Bucketlist Company, offer 3 different treks to Machu Picchu. We offer the Inca Trail, we offer the Salcantay trek, and then we also offer the Lares trek as well. And all of them are very different. And I just wanted to bring Dave on today just to have a chat about the 3 different treks themselves, and then which one each of us would choose to take our clients to Machu Picchu. So hello, Dave.
Hello, Keith.
So, Dave, you've been to Machu Picchu, same as me, on many of occasions now. You've trekked the route. And why should Machu Picchu, before we look at the routes, why should Machu Picchu be on people's bucket lists?
First off, there's an easy answer to that. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world. And each time I go, the trek I love the trekking, but on the trek, the guides are so knowledgeable that you learn so much about the Incas and the Quechua Indians and what they achieved, that you just, by the time you actually get to Machu Picchu, it's not like rocking up in a coach and seeing it. You've been immersed in the countryside they traveled through, the cloud forest, which is fantastic, and you've learned so much about the I don't know if it's the right word, but the culture, how they lived and how they survived, how they were organized as a civilization, that when you actually reach it, it's mind-blowing is what it is. You see this place and you just think, all those years ago, that was created and it's hidden away. It was self-sufficient. Words fail me again. I know I'm not very good sometimes with these things, but there's something of awe and wonder about it when you see it, which is far more than looking at a picture. And I think far, far more than just going there and being there, right, tick, I've seen it. It's the approach that you make to it, which is a mental one and a physical one.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? Because obviously, if you are not into trekking, you can go to Machu Picchu and you can get the train to Aguas Calientes and you can get the bus up to Machu Picchu and you can do your half-day tour of Machu Picchu and you can come away again and go back to Cusco or wherever else you are, you're visiting. And I think, for the majority of tourists, that is how you witness Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of trekking to Machu Picchu, I think, you, like you were saying, you spend 3, 4, 5 days with local knowledgeable guys and guides who are telling you all the history. So when you actually get to Machu Picchu, you can experience Machu Picchu for itself. You're not having to learn everything because you've done that on the trek on the way there.
Yeah, it's a very complete experience because I'm just talking about one of the guides that we had, Frank. He was a great guy, but he can trace his Quechua, which is the native Indian, lineage back a long way. And in his family now, there are still traditions that go right back to Inca times, because Incas were obviously the leaders of the time. And he can see that in the way his great grandfather spoke to him and his grandfather spoke to him. And him conveying that to us just naturally as we're trekking, not just strolling, but trekking, it had a massive impact when you actually got to witness the site itself. A massive impact. You could feel, if you like, the human history beneath it, or that surrounds it.
So, in terms of all of our treks, you will fly into Cusco from Lima. Generally, is the route that we take, and obviously, generally, you have a few days in Cusco before the trek, and that's to acclimatise in terms of the height you're at Cusco.
And that's necessary, absolutely necessary, and particularly if you are going to do the Salcantay trek, where you get to the height of 4,600 meters, you've got to have spent time at what is termed high altitude, and 3,500 meters is termed high altitude. You have got to spend time there so your body can start to adapt physiologically to the pressure you're going to put on it when you're trekking uphill. So it is compulsory. I have to say, everyone loves Cusco because everything is on tap. And I think one of the challenges that we face sometimes is at the end of day 2, people have almost forgotten they're going to be doing a very high altitude trek the next day. And it's all going to be very different.
I mean, Cusco is probably one of my most favourite places to visit. I think in terms of, I love going to Cusco. Like the restaurants there, there's some really nice bars there. Just the whole feel of the place, the square. Like I really enjoy Cusco.
It's very foreign and it's very relaxed, and I think both those things make it quite intoxicating, to be honest.
But I do think that when you look at a Machu Picchu trek compared to, an Everest Base Camp trek or a Kilimanjaro trek or other bucket list style trips, like the Machu Picchu trek is far more westernized and civilized compared to the other treks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You cannot avoid the tourist vibe. Saying that, once you get out of Cusco and you start trekking, in certainly Salcantay trek, in all of them, there is a hard, a challenging day, and that's the tourist vibe disappears then because it's you and you rising to that challenge as part of a group being supported, but the tourist vibe goes. But you're right, Lima, Cusco. You can think, it's a touristy kind of trip, and your guard goes down, so it's a little bit of a shock when you actually start the trek.
So most people will have heard of the Inca Trail. They will. That is the most published one. That is the one that most people do to get to Machu Picchu. Do you want to start off just by explaining the logistics of the Inca Trail?
Yes, I do that. I think the first thing to recognise is that there are many Inca trails in Peru because these trails were how various communities, like Machu Picchu was one of them, but there were many, many of them, how they actually communicated, and they were used as transport highways, llamas carrying mainly agricultural goods, but also Inca gold, things like that. They were used. The Inca, who was the chief, was carried around those trails to visit the provinces, and also his accountants did that. And there's a whole amazing cultural history to do with that. But the Inca Trail itself, day one, I think you get to a height and people are trekking and going quite nicely. But day 2, there's always a challenge day, isn't there? When you do any of these treks in Peru, and you have to get over what's called Dead Woman's Pass at 4,200 meters. And the way you get over it is climbing very uneven rock steps. So it's very much a day that's broken down into sections of stopping, so you can actually get your energy back together again. But you have to get over quite a height. off you go. You get over, and then you drop down, and down, and obviously things become warmer, and from there on, in a sense, you've done the hard bit. Although people will see on YouTube things like the Gringo Steps or the Gringo Breaker, I think it's called. Sometimes it's called a number of things.
Gringo Killer.
Gringo Killer is another one. I mean, there are other mini challenges, but once you've actually done Dead Woman's Pass, you've done the hardest bit really, and the rest of it is there's some challenges, but they're not as tough. So if you like, the trek becomes easier and easier, and then you have a camp, and the Machu Picchu is a national and international site. So you're not just allowed to wander in there. There's a gateway that you have to pass through. That opens early in the morning, about 5 o'clock. But if you want to be in there early, and we always do, we're queuing from 3:30 in the morning just to make sure we can be one of the first people to see Machu Picchu before the crowds are there. I think that's a plus point. Once you get through that gate, you walk, and then you get to the famous Sun Gate. Now, last time we did it, it was very misty, so we didn't get the iconic pictures. But the minute you descend and the mist rises, the drama just unfolds in front of you. So you actually drop down onto Machu Picchu with the Inca Trail. Then there's your guided tour. A lot of the information can be brief because you've been given lots of it beforehand, but all the relevant things are pointed out to you. And I don't want to spoil that because people need to go and experience it. And then there's a break in Aguas Calientes and a train ride back to Cusco, which without fail, I can tell you, everyone falls asleep no matter what trek you are on.
Well, they stay awake for the first bit because that train ride is quite an iconic train ride, isn't it? The trains out there, they've got windows in the roof, so as you're driving through the mountain scenery, you can look up and see everything.
Yes, and you're travelling right alongside the sacred river, so there's a lot of wonder to it all, but inevitably people fall asleep for the last hour and a half. It's my view of it anyway. Yeah,
you generally get back quite late that evening, don't you?
Yes, you do. Yeah, you had it. You need your bed.
I think looking back at the Inca Trail, it is a very commercial trek. With all the treks to Machu Picchu, you are staying tented.
Yes.
To all the treks, you are having your equipment carried for you. Now, with the Inca Trail, that's the only one where actual porters will carry your bags. For the other two treks, they'll use mules to carry the equipment. Yes. With the Inca Trail, I think the key thing here is it is the commercial trek, and that trek is very limited in terms of the amount of permits that are given on a daily basis. So the park will only give 200 permits a day for trekkers, and of that there'll also be 300 permits for the staff who are going to go with them. So I think in terms of making people aware that actually at the start of every day there are 500 people starting that trek every single day, and especially this time of year. I mean, the best times to trek to Machu Picchu are between kind of May and September, are kind of the peak times to trek it. So each day there could be up to 500 people starting that trek each day.
Yes, and that translates into us having early starts every morning. People get used to that, and certainly when we get to the gate to get into the Machu Picchu preserved area, we're up at 3. We've got to, because the point is we want it to be the best trek you can do, and we want to be the first ones there. We don't want it to be crowded.
Yeah.
So you have to do things to make that happen, of course.
Yeah, and I think the other, there are designated campsites on the Inca Trail, aren't there? And
Yes.
so it's not like you can pitch up wherever you want. So you have to make it to that campsite you've been designated at the start of the trek.
Yes. And you are there'll be a number of campsites, and you'll be in a row of tents, and another group in a row of tents behind you, and another group behind you there. So that's the kind of flavor of it. But people are still excited to do the Inca Trail. I know it's one of many, as I said at the beginning, but it is defined as the Inca Camino, the Inca Trail, and people want to do it. And it's got its challenges, and certainly when you get to the end of it, it's like all of our treks. It's got a fantastic ending to it, conclusion.
Yeah, and I think the one thing to conclude from here is the fact that the Inca Trail is the only one that allows you to trek to Machu Picchu.
Yes, and you come at it from height, so you've got every opportunity, if the climate and the weather is with you, to see Machu Picchu from a great height and focus in on it more and more. It's like being in your own drone, really, and you can get a fantastic appreciation of how it is situated and how it was built. It's incredible.
Yeah, and they're talking now as well of, obviously, when people go into Machu Picchu to visit for the day, if you're not on the Inca Trail, you used to be able to walk up if you wanted to and trek up to the Sun Gate. But I believe from what I heard this year that's now going to start becoming a charged activity as well. So they're going to charge people to trek up to the Sun Gate as well now.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So then let's move on then. So we've had a quick walk through the Inca Trail. How does the Inca Trail then compare to the Salcantay trek?
Well, the Salcantay trek, my experience is there are far fewer trekkers to start with. It is also, if you like mountains, it adds another dimension. You still have the cloud forest to walk through, and there's loads to say about the cloud forest, and that comes on the second day, really. But the first day, you leave Cusco and you start about 3,900 meters. First thing you do is climb up to the Humantay Lake, which is a glacial lake, which people make as a trek in its own right, and we just do that in one afternoon. It's a very dramatic glacial lake, which is about 4,200 meters up. So it's as high as you would go on the Inca Trail anyway, and it's extremely dramatic and beautiful lake, and people can find pictures of that. That's the Humantay Lake, and then you make your way over you then camp the night beneath the Salcantay Mountain. What is different is that is a very cold camp. I think it was -5, -10, no wind, but because above you is a glacier, and the cold air is dropping down, so everyone wraps up for the night, puts their bobble hats on or their beanies on, gets into bed, and they have a night being as warm as they possibly can. And we've got lots of little tips and tricks to help people with that. But then you are climbing, and it is unlike the Inca Trail. It's not rock steps. It is just a rocky, rock-strewn way. But you're going to 4,600 meters, so you're climbing high. When we get to the top, it's brief photographs, but clearly we always want to get people down from that, not stay there too long, and then down you go to amazing drop down to around 2,800 meters, and suddenly everything becomes very warm again. So you have a big contrast on that first day. You wake up cold in the morning, and then you come down to a really warm campsite. Lovely campsite. Not certainly, it's more like camping in somebody's field in a farm rather than a devoted campsite with lots and lots of rows of tents. And And then the next day, there is a cloud forest walk alongside a ravine and a river, and that is full of hummingbirds and tropical flowers and cicadas shouting at you. That's a beautiful, beautiful day. You get down from there, and then the next day there's a brief trek, and then we end that day relaxing in some natural hot springs. And the challenge there for us as leaders is getting people out of them. They're absolutely gorgeous, and we camp the night there. And the last day is really the last big trekking day is then climbing another 3,500 meter height called Lactapata, where you're high above Machu Picchu and you can look down on it. So there's a lot of drama, hard work, but a lot of drama in that. And as you said earlier, the only trek that actually drops down into Machu Picchu is the Inca Trail. So with this trek, you make your way down to Aguas Calientes, and there's a hotel stay for the night. And then with the tourists, you catch the bus up. But of course, you've seen it from afar from Lactapata, and you've learned so much about the Inca way of life on the way that you can really appreciate, again, Machu Picchu when you get there. So it's a higher trek. The weather variation is higher. You've got high mountains and glaciers. Then the next minute you're walking through a cloud forest, and then you're in hot springs, and then you're at Machu Picchu. So it's a lot of variety in it, and not many trekkers.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing with that one as well, isn't it? It is becoming more popular, but with the different, you can camp where you like with the different campsites. You're not as restricted on being where you need to be, are you, on that one?
Not at all.
And then the Lares trek is very similar in terms of the Salcantay trek. I always think I always say the Lares trek is about the community, and we start in the town of Lares. And unlike you, who finishes in the hot springs, we actually start the trek in the hot springs, which is very difficult to get the group going because they need to get them to start trekking. But you spend your time on the Lares trek, walking through the villages, through the communities. The horsemen who accompany us, they live in those communities that we're walking through. They are from those parts, and they are so keen to take you into their houses and meet their families. And the group that I had out on the Lares trek this year went and helped harvest potatoes, and going into their house and learning all about how they live. And those are the things you don't get to experience on the Inca Trail, because it is so commercial. And I think that is the advantage of like the Salcantay trek or the Lares trek, is it just feels that you are more involved in the community and Peru itself compared to, I don't want to say it like being on a fairground ride, but you kind of feel you're doing it with lots of other people when you're on the Inca Trail. And I just find, from my perspective, with the Lares trek, when I did it this year, we didn't see another trekker for the 3 days we were trekking.
That's wonderful, isn't it? I know you love that, and that's what my ideal is. That always, and we do compromise on it. Obviously, you have to, but when that happens, it's wonderful.
And with the Lares trek as well, it's very similar. I mean, the Lares trek, we kind of finished down the road from Ollantaytambo, which is again a lovely little town on the way to Machu Picchu. And whereas you trek into Aguas Calientes, we on the Lares trek, you trek into Ollantaytambo and then get the train from Ollantaytambo to Aguas Calientes then. And again, you spend the night in a hotel, and then you get up in the morning, and like Dave said, with the Salcantay trek, you get the bus up to Machu Machu Picchu and go in that way. I mean, you can walk up, but I certainly wouldn't advise walking up from Aguas Calientes. Everyone, I think, starts with that great idea in the head that I'm going to walk and not take the bus up. But I think halfway up that step climb, they soon then wish that they had paid the little bit of extra money and taken the bus up. But all of our trips include the bus up anyway and the bus back down. But so in terms of your choice of trek then, Dave, if you had to give advice to people on which of the three treks to pick, which ones would you advise? And potentially for what type of people as well? Because not everybody's the same and people want to get different things out of their experiences. So, if you are this type of person, would you recommend they do that trip or?
Right. If you're an adventurous hiker, I would definitely say do the Salcantay trip because of the height you go to, the mountain scenery. And when we were there, the pass we went through had an avalanche. So you're out in the mountains for part of it, and you have the contrast with the cloud forest. I think if you're a good hiker and you love the mountains, that's definitely the one to do. The Inca Trail, I think you're keen to do a trek. You want to get to Machu Picchu. You're not necessarily in love with very high altitude and mountains. The Inca Trail has got a lot to say for it, and it will come down to the quality, the guide that you've got, and listening to what they've got to say and asking them questions, because that's the trek when you'll see more, if you like, Inca remains, and there's a lot to say about them. And the guides will tell you, but I've noticed time and time again, if you ask questions, they've got so much more knowledge than they actually have got time to tell you. So you get a chance to walk along and learn so much. So I would definitely say for the average hiker or whatever who wants to see Machu Picchu and is really interested in seeing Inca relics other than Machu Picchu, then it's the Inca Trail. The Lavis Trail, I mean, you know best about that. I mean, that to me sounds like it's a get away from it all trek, really. You end up at Machu Picchu, but actually you're really communicating with local people. And that's, I think that's a different sort of trekker, really. You're not beasting yourself. You're not trying to, I must get over this pass. I want to talk to these people. I want to know how they live. I want to see their children. There's something for everyone in all of them, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think, in terms of on the Lares trek, I mean, we do hit 4,400.
Yes.
So, again, from an altitude perspective, it's another 200 meters higher than what you would do on the Inca Trail. But I mean, you've kind of summed it up brilliantly there. Like when I explain to people the three different treks, like my version of it is if you want to, engross yourself in the local culture, then the Lares trek is the one for you. If you want to see mountains and be amongst mountains, then it's the Salcantay trek for you. And if you're interested in the Inca ruins and more the history, then it's the Inca Trail. And that's kind of how I, sort of explain the three of them to people.
Yes.
But I think from my perspective, I think it's just about educating people that there are different options than just the Inca Trail. But it's been pushed so much over the years that a lot of people think, I must take the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. And as Dave said earlier on in the episode, there are thousands of miles of Inca Trail all the way through South America. They're not just in Peru, they're right the way through South America. And actually you are just on one very small part of an Inca Trail that led to Machu Picchu.
Yep. Yeah.
One last thing, Dave, before we finish the episode. Obviously, we can't say this for every single trip that happens, but we can certainly say this for our trips. In the Peruvian people are such friendly people, and you get looked after so well on the treks. And I think the food that you get whilst you're on a trek to Machu Picchu or any of our Machu Picchu treks is probably the best food you would get on any trip anywhere in the world, I would say, out of all the other ones that we do. Would you agree with that?
I would say, yeah. And what I would say is, without fail, our trekkers cannot believe out of that little green tent comes such beautifully presented food. Some of it is, I mean, you'd expect to see it in a high-class restaurant, the little hors d'oeuvre that come out. You can't believe that someone in a tent or in a stone shed has produced that. And the chefs we've had are so proud of their work and just the quality of the food, and it's local food as well. That's the other thing. It's what's there. So just, yeah, it is wonderful. And I really want to say something about the porters. I've never experienced. I've talked about Nepal, and I love the porters out there. But at 5 o'clock we have to get up, and there's a little tap on your tent, and the Buenos Dias, and outside is a porter, and he's got a flask of hot water, and he's got some coffee, and he's got some coca leaves, and he's got some tea bags. What would you like to wake you up on a tent in the middle of nowhere? And then the next thing that happens is a little bowl appears with lukewarm water, so you can wash your face and wash your hands before you go to another tent for breakfast. I mean, that attention to individual trekkers, I don't meet that anywhere else other than in Peru.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was out there this time, one evening, the chef came out and was flambeing bananas with pisco for our dessert that evening. Like you say, it was like being in a top restaurant in London where the chef comes to the table and flambés it
yes.
in front of you. And then on our final night, he made us a cake, like out on a stove in the middle of the mountains, and he actually made the cake was huge. Like it was all iced beautifully, and you think, how on earth, my wife can't make a cake in the kitchen in the UK. You've just made it in a tent out in the middle of the mountains. So yeah. You do get very well looked after. Yeah,
they care. They really care for the trekkers individually as well, because I had a couple of trekkers who've had special dietary needs, and I'm not joking. I wished I was them sometimes, because I had fabulous food, and what came out for them was just like a step above, really.
Yeah.
So you certainly are loved and looked after.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much for that quick rundown, Dave, on all three of the trips. If Machu Picchu is on your bucket list, in the show notes to this episode, I will put links to those 3 different treks. If you go onto our website, you can download the quick guide for each of those treks. I've also written a 60, 70 page guide to Machu Picchu that goes through those treks in more and more detail, what kit you need, etc. And I'll make sure all of that is put in the show notes, so you can have a quick look if you need to. But in the meantime, if you've got any questions on Machu Picchu or any of those 3 trips that we've discussed, then please don't hesitate to send me a message, and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you and advise which is the best one for you guys to go on. So if you've liked this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast, please subscribe to the podcast so we can tell you when the next episodes will be going live. It's also great for our rankings on the podcast to show people that they are interested in the stuff that we're talking about. So thanks ever so much for listening, and we will see you next week. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.